technically feasible. You may not have the platform if it's an IC project. You may find that you cannot purchase certain hardware, or the whatever you are planning for on a platform, on a hardware. You don't have that hardware, and you don't have the necessary finances to buy the suitable hardware. So you need to look at technical issues. So we looked at that. And then I think we ended at tech, and then we started looking at economic issues. Then I have just added this, but I mentioned it last time. These three are the fundamental ones, and these three are the things that people consider. But there are certain things that you will need. They are not fundamental, but depending on what project you are working on, you will need them. And I give the example of, if you are doing a project in the health sector, you will need to think about ethical issues, because we have issues regarding the disclosure of patient information. Some people may want to get this information from you, but as a medical institution or as a doctor, you realize that ethically you cannot give somebody's personal information because it's confidential. Now, if you give it out, it is unethical. And so you may find that by you giving out that information, you are disadvantaging somebody. So you need to think about ethical issues. If it's financial institutions, you may think about data security issues. If it's something to do, if you are setting a factory, for example, someone is building a factory and he has not thought about where the effluent is going. So you may find that you'll need to think about environmental issues. So this is why I'm saying plus others as dictated by the project. But these are the fundamental issues. In other words, they cut across all the document, all the projects. But depending on the project, we may have to include other issues. So we only look at for this course, we are only looking at the three in detail. But at the back of your mind, you should know that we have other issues. So last time we stopped at the cost benefit, and these are what I'm referring to as economic issues. So you have to do a cost benefit analysis. Now, we said in cost benefits analysis, you first of all have to determine the direct benefits. You have to determine the costs, which for costs, it's very easy to put a monetary value. But for benefits, depending on whether they are direct benefits, accessible indirect benefits, or intangible benefits, you'll find that sometimes it's hard to put a monetary value to that benefit. Like something like customer satisfaction. Yeah, it is very difficult to measure it. And you have to take time to measure it. Now, for a bank, you will measure it over a long period of time. And you'll have to do some analysis. For example, pre-ATM machines, people used to go to the bank teller. Now, when an ATM machine comes, initially, like I was explaining to you, there's resistance. But finally, people see the value. Now, this will span, and the bank, and they will only realize that benefit if they were keeping records, where they'll ask, before the ATM machines came, how many customers was I having? How many customers were joining my bank in a year? Now, after installed, how many customers have been joining my bank? And then you have to compare yourself to the other banks. And you have to think about things like this. How many people are coming to the job market? So you cannot just say that, you see, last year, I was able to get 10,000 customers. This year, I've got 15,000 customers. And it's because of this. Now, remember, the population is also growing. People who are leaving institutions and joining the market is also growing. And that's why it becomes very difficult to put a monetary value to intangible benefits. So in most cases, we just estimate. Then we went ahead and started saying that we explore this. We looked at the net profit. Then we looked at the payback period. And then I left you to look at what is called the return on investment. So today we are going to look at the net present value and the internal rate of return. So net profit, you just look at like this. We had 3 projects, and of the projects, this is the profit after 5 years, where the net profit is the total income minus the total cost. Now, and then we said, just looking at these figures, you may not get the proper view of the project. So we said, what additional thing? Then we looked at the payback period, where we said that some projects take a long time to pay you back the money you invested, and some take a short time. And there's a correlation between risk. Later on, we shall be looking at risk and the payback period. And I remember giving you an example where I was saying, if you get 5 million shillings, you may decide to invest in a matatu, or you invest in a house. Now, if you invest in a matatu, the payback period is going to be short, but the risk is high. If you invest in a house, the payback period is long, but the risk is relatively lower. So we said that in addition to the net profit, we also need to look at the payback period. And remember, like last time, when I asked the question, which is the best project here, somebody gave this answer, and somebody gave this answer. The person who gave this answer was looking at this absolute figure. But the person who gave this answer was looking at this answer vis-a-vis the amount of money he has invested. This person has invested 1 million, and he's going to get 100,000 after 5 years. This one has invested 120 and is going to get 75,000. So you also need to look at how soon do you get your money, or what is the ratio of the money that you have invested compared to the money that you will get. So we said you cannot just look at the absolute figure. You have to think about what you have invested, and you have to think at how soon you will get your money. Then we looked at return on investment. Now, return on investment is taking care of the person who said project 4 is the best, because return on investment is taking into account the amount of money you have invested. So we have a formula for calculating the return on investment, where return on investment is net return on investment divided by the cost of investment times 100. And as a formula, we say is the final value of investment minus initial value of investment over the cost of investment. And then we looked at project 1. We looked at this project to calculate the return on investment. And for this project, as you can see, in year 1, the return of investment is -90, in year 2, -80, and so on up to year 5, where it's going to be positive 50. So if this project was to take 4 years, you will have lost. Now, if it takes 5 years, then you shall have gained, because we have a positive return on investment. Then I said that the return on the basic return on investment does not take into account the length of time that an investment is held, or what is called the holding time. So the annualized return on investment refines the return on investment further, and we refine it by taking into account the number of years. Now, I had told you to do a calculation based on this, so I hope you went home and did it. Now you can see the annualized return on investment, what it's going to be. So the return on investment for all the projects, as you can see that this is the net profit, where we're just taking the absolute figure without taking how long the project is taking. Now, in the return on investment, we have now taken into consideration what the number of years, in other words, we take into account the number of years. Now, as you can see, this one is winning, because we have now taken into account that this project is going to take 5 years. So the return investment, as you can see, is 63%. So this 63% is a more realistic figure to use to choose project 4. So you are saying that in project 4, the return on investment is going to be higher than all the other projects. Therefore, project 4 is because you are trying to make a choice between 4 projects, or between 4 options for projects. So when you make a choice, you find when you calculate the return on investment, project 4 wins, followed by project 1 or project 3. Now, if we look at the annualized return of investment, as you can see, again, now you can see in this case, okay, just a minute. You can see in this case that they are comparable. The annualized return on investments for these particular 4 projects are comparable, because as you can see, this is equal to this, but you can see that the differences are not very big. Now, again, using the annualized return on investment, then you will find that project 4 is still winning. So far, project 4 is still better. Now, look, we said for a realistic value, then we must take all the 3 into consideration. So as you can see, for a realistic value, you need to look at the net profit. But looking at the net profit alone, you will choose project 1. Now, if you add net profit plus in return on investment, you will choose project 4. And if you look at return on net profit plus return on investment plus the payback period, you will choose you still choose project 4. Because if you look, how do you know the payback period? The payback period is this. If you look at project 4, you will get your money back, or your break-even point is at this point. Because at that point, you will have gotten back your 120. And then from that point onwards, whatever you get is going to be the project. Now, if you look at project 3, you will get your money slightly after 3 years. You'll get your money back slightly after 3 years at this point, and your profit is going to be 50,000. So anything after this point is going to be your profit. So I've colored this differently to show you that for you to choose a particular option, you need to consider the net profit, the return on investment, and the payback period. Now, if you look at project 2 and project 1, you'll get your money back after 5 years. Now, it's important to get your money back sooner so that you can reinvest that money, because here you've spent money, but now you've gotten this money. So after 4 years here, you have gotten back your 120, and then the project is still continuing. And then what is going to happen is that since you are getting back your money, you can reinvest it. So that is what the return on investment does. Is there any question? Fine. We go to the next thing. Now, the next thing is the value of money changes as time goes on. Mohalisi, you raised a hand.
I wanted to ask, when tracking return on investment,
Yes.
sometimes when the project is ongoing, there are those plans you had and budget that you had. Now you find that some factors might come up during the project implementation.
Mm-hmm.
Then this might, let's say, affect the return on investment. Let's say you are deploying a fiber cable from Nairobi to Eldoret.
You are doing
And
what?
you are deploying a fiber cable from Nairobi to Eldoret,
Yes.
and the investors expect to return their money within a certain period. But during this period, some other factors come up. Let's say there's a fiber cut, vandalism. How do you handle it in terms of return on investment? Do you go back to the drawing board, or how do you handle it?
Oh, okay, that's a valid question. But Muhalisi, remember, at this point, this is the initiation phase. At this point, your project has not started. You are still in the planning. You are still in the planning phase. You want to determine whether to go ahead with the project or not to go ahead with the project. So at this point, the project has not started. So to answer your question, later on we shall see. You see, apart from the financial analysis of the project, here you are planning, you have not started the project. And in this planning, you want to see whether this project is going to go ahead or not. Now, to answer your question, later on you have to do a risk analysis, where in the risk analysis, because the probability of risk could also determine whether your project is going to go ahead or not. So like when you say, when this fiber is cut, you see, when the fiber is cut, is the project is either in progress or is operational. So, but during during this planning process, you need to think about things like risk. Now, you need to ask yourself, the risks on this project, is it worth me going ahead with the project? So, when you do that risk assessment, is when you'll determine, okay, the risk is worth taking. And that is when the things that you are saying are going to be taken into consideration. So do not confuse this with when the project is in process. This is before the project has started. I don't know whether I'm answering you.
Yeah, that is answered well.
Okay. So the next thing we want to do return on investment is a good thing to do. But, sorry. So, return on investment is simple to calculate. And because it's simple to calculate, it makes it a popular method. But it has two major problems. It does not consider the time element. And a lot of times people take return on investment and compare it to the bank interest rates. Now, this is not a valid measure as timing and compounding of interest are not considered. This can lead to very misleading conclusions. Now, think of it this way. Most projects, you must source for money. Now, let's assume you go to a bank to the bank, and when you go to the bank, you take a loan. If you remember, sometime last month, I mean, loans have been at loans were going for 12, 12.5, 13%, 14%. But from I think last month, loans are now, if you want to take money from a bank, you'll take a loan of 17 plus percent. So if you want to take a loan from the bank, you must specify the period. You'll say, give me a loan of 5 million shillings. I'll pay it in 4 years. Then they'll calculate for you how much you'll be paying per month. Now, most times you find that if you take, and you know the interest is compounded. If you take a loan of 5 million, in 4 years' time, you will find that you will have paid the bank something close to, you took 5 million, but you are paying something close to 8-9 million shillings. Now, there is a difference. Supposing you are paying the bank 9 million shillings after 5 years, because you took 5 million, you are paying 9 million. It means that you are paying an extra 4 million. So that loan is costing you 4 million. Now, you are taking this loan to do a project. Now, your project should be able to repay back your loan. So when you are thinking about a project, think about your money. What happens to your money as time goes on? So to do that, we look at something that is called the net present value. In other words, I'm planning today, and I'm planning for 5 million. Today I've taken 5 million. Now, what will 5 million be in 5 years' time? It's certainly not going to be the same. So the net present value considers profitability, it considers the time value of money, and it discounts the future cash flows to the current values. I does this using a percentage rate called the discount rate. And then the net present value takes risk into consideration. Now, this is what I was telling Muhalisi. You know, because you haven't started the project, you also need to think about the risks involved in the project. Because if the risks are too high, don't go into the project. Like I've told you, you look at the transport sector and you look at the construction sector. Those are viable projects. And with 5 million shillings, you could invest your money in these two projects. But you need to ask yourself, other than these other things that I've talked about, you need to ask yourself about the risk. Now, risk can determine whether you are going into the construction project or whether you are going into the into the transport sector. So NPV takes risk into consideration. Now, what is net present value? Now, we shall do this by using a simple example. We shall use a simple example of inflation. Now, 100 shillings today is 100 shillings today. But 100 shillings 12 months next year at this particular time is not going to be 100 shillings. It's not going to be the equivalent of 100 shillings today. In other words, what you can buy 100 shillings today is not what you will buy with 100 shillings next year. Now, look at the price of fuel. This time last year, or this time 2 years ago, and this time today. With 1,000 shillings, you'll not buy the same quantity of fuel. Now, this is because of inflation. So Kenya, 100 shillings today will be worth less in 12 months if the inflation is 5%. So with 5% inflation, 100 shillings today is going to be 95 shillings in a year's time. So the 100 shillings gained in 5 years, 5 years ago, is going to be 78 shillings today using inflation. So 100 years, if you had 100 shillings 5 years ago, it is worth 78 shillings today. So another way of considering NPV is that it is the reverse of looking at the value of money from the past. That is, with 5% inflation, to have the same purchase value of 100 shillings 5 years ago, you would need to spend 128 shillings today. So what 128 shillings can do today is equivalent to what 100 shillings would have done 5 years ago. So NPV considers the value of mine in the future with today as the baseline. So why is it important? It's important because you are still evaluating your project. Now, we have said before you start or before you get the go-ahead or the go-ahead with the project, you need to look at strategic issues. You need to look at technical issues. Now we are looking at financial issues. Now, remember, the project has not started. You are still evaluating it so that you get the go-ahead. Now, to evaluate a project, you need to look at the project life. So you say, the life of my project is 5 years. Now, those 5 years, as you are doing your planning, you are forecasting on the amount of money you will get. So you need to forecast the value of money in 5 years from now. So that is what the net present value does. So the formula for net present values of future cash is present value is the value of money in year T divided by 1 plus R raised to the power of T, where R is the discount rate, is the discount expressed as a decimal value. Now, rates are usually in percentages. But when we are calculating the present value, we convert those percentages into decimal values. Now, and T is the number of years. So T is the number of years, R is the rate. So a simpler method is to use discount tables. I will show you that, where we are saying present value is equals to value in year T times the discount factor. Now, where does the discount table come from? You notice we are saying it's value in year T. So it could be like value in year T over 1, or value in year T times 1 over 1 plus R raised to the power of T. Now, you can calculate this. This is what I'm saying. So we are going to take this times the money. Now, so what happens? You can do a calculator using this. You can calculate this using a calculator, but it's going to take you a lot of time. So because it's going to take you a lot of time, you can get this table. So, for example, the discount rate is 6%. So what you shall do is that you shall take 1 plus 6. 6 divided by 100 is 0.06. So 1 plus 0.06. So you shall get 1.06. So in year 1, in year 0, we know that any number raised to the power of year 0 is 1. So in year 0, the value of your money is what it actually is. Now, after 1 year, this is 1 year, you shall take 1 plus 0.06 raised to the power of 1. So it will be 1 over 1.06. And it becomes 0.943. After 2 years, it's going to be 1 over 1.06 divided by 2. After 3 years, it's going to be 1 plus 0.06 or 1.06 raised to the power of 3. So you can see as the years go by, this value of money of this the discount factor is dropping. If you discount at 10%, this is what will happen. So it's going to be 1 plus 0.1 or 1.1. So it's going to be 1 over 1.1 divided by 0, which is 1. Or it's going to be 1 plus 1.1 raised to the power of 2 of 1. So it's going to be 1 over 1.1, which is 0.9001. Or it's going to be 1 over 1.1 raised to the power of 2, which is going to be this. So these are the discount tables, and these are easily available. So you shall find that this is the year, this is the discounting factor. So this is the T, and this is the R. So you don't have to go into this calculation. So you just go to the table and pick the values and use the values. So what happens? Assuming a 10% discount rate, below is the NPV for project 1. Now remember, this is the initial value. This is project 1. This was our project 1. This is project 2, project 3, project 4. So what you do is this. You will take project 1. This is what we had. So this is before we discount. Now we want to discount using 10%. Now if we use 10%, we come here, come to the 10%. So year 1, 0.909, 0.909, year 2, 0.826, 0.751, year 3, 0.751. So you come here, you can see 1, 0.901, 0.826, 0.751. 0.751. You pick it from this table. So you don't have to do that calculation manually because these tables are there. Just like mathematical tables are there, just like algorithmic tables are there, and so on. So the discounted cash flow is that you take this, you multiply by this. You take this, you multiply by this. You take this, you multiply by this. And you keep on doing that until the year your project ends. So when you discount with 10%, you shall get what we call the net present value of 618. So what I was telling you is you cannot just take an absolute figure. So this absolute figure is going to deceive you. It's going to tell you to go ahead with the project, and it hasn't taken other parameters into consideration. And this is why when we started off, I gave this example, and that's why I said we cannot just pick this absolute figure. You have to think, how soon will I be paid? You have to think, how much is my profit compared to the money I've invested, and so on. Now, NPV is taking into consideration the time value of money. So you shall find, if we take the time value of money, we get that the profit is only 618. So we need to also calculate the NTV for each of the 4 projects. That is what I would want to give you as an exercise. So you will need to calculate it, but because I just want to continue with the lecture, I will consider this. So we looked at the return of investment, and I did it for the 4 projects. Now, this is how the projects look like when we discount the money. Now we have seen how we have arrived at 618. Now we'll use the same method for project 2. You can see it's negative 179,770. Look at project 3, 13,721. Look at project 4, 21,662. Now you can see project 4 is still winning when we take the time value of money, which you should. Because if you look at the way Kenya was 5 years ago and the way Kenya is right now, things are totally different. Now, remember, I've said this is project initiation. These are things you'll have to do to decide whether to go ahead with the project or not. So, assuming that these were project options, then, because we said even before you start a project, you look at the options. And I gave you an example where I was saying we are doing computer science. Most likely the projects we'll do will be IT related. Now, if it's IT related, one of the things you will need to do is to procure software. Now, there are various options of procuring your software. You can build your software in-house. I gave you that example. If you have an IT department, you can build your software in-house. Just like the E-class that we now have, the University of Nairobi E-class. It was built in-house. You could tell people, you could look for programmers outside and bring them to build for you this product in-house. Now, you'll have to do the cost-benefit analysis for that. 3, you could ask somebody, or you could go to a company and ask them to do the software for you, to build the software for you. 4, you could go and buy a ready-made software and customize it. So these are the options that I am talking about. So you have those options to choose from. Now, how do you choose the best? One of the ways of choosing the best is doing this cash flow analysis. So these are the 4 options, and as you can see, project 4 is still winning. Now, remember, this is your investment, and that's why it's negative. Money is going out. In this case, money is coming in. So because money is coming in and is coming over a period of time, you need to think about the time value of money. Don't take an absolute figure. Like in this case, you don't take an absolute figure. So the NPV is taking time into consideration. Okay. Now, I hope that is clear. So, this is the exercise that I've given you, that the solution to this exercise. But I want you to do it manually to see how I arrived at it. So, NPV, you don't do NPV for the sake of it. You do NPV so that it uses you to do some analysis. Now, if the NPV is greater than 0, what we have here, you can see here we have a negative NPV. Here we have positive NPV, positive NPV, positive NPV. But here we have a negative NPV. So what does that mean? If the NPV is greater than 0, then the investment will add value to your firm or your organization. So in that case, the project may be accepted. Now we are not saying will be accepted, we are saying may be accepted, because there are other factors. There is risk, like somebody asked. You also need to do risk analysis. So when you now sit down to evaluate the project, so you see, we've looked at strategic issues, we've looked at technical issues. So strategically, you say it fits within our institution's strategy, our 5-year strategy. Technically, you say, I have qualified people, I have the platforms. Now you look at economically, this is what you are saying. How does it rate? And that's why we are saying may be accepted. This is because economic analysis is not the only thing. There are other things, there are ethical things and so on. Now, if the NPV is less 0, the investment would subtract value from the firm. So you reject the project. Now, if the NPV is equals to 0, the investment would neither gain or lose from the value. In other words, you are indifferent to the decision. You don't know whether you are benefiting or not. So in terms of money, it's not giving you anything. The decision should be based on other criteria, e.g., strategic positioning or other factors not explicitly included in the calculation. So if the NPV is equals to 0, then you are indifferent. But to tilt the decision of whether to go ahead with the project or not to go ahead with the project, you think about things. Now, let's look at education. Your dad educated you. He's taking you to school. He's using his money. Now, a long time ago, people like my dad, they educated you, and they used to have retirement in mind. When my child retires, when I'm old, let me just educate him so that when I'm old, he'll help me. Now, a lot of these men realize that this doesn't happen. You educated your child, hoping that when you retire, your child is going to take care of you in the old age. Your boy marries somebody. The wife is hostile. She wants to know how much money this guy is earning, and she monitors the money. So you can't take that money to your dad. If it's a girl, she probably goes and marries somebody abroad, and the child will not. So that's a bad investment. If that is what you are thinking, that was your strategy, your long-term strategy. But if your long-term strategy is this, I'm educating this child so that the child is dependent on himself. The child is independent of me. I'm not educating him so that he'll take care of me in old age. So I want this child to be independent of me. So in that case, you're not getting any economic benefit, but your objective is still satisfied. And that's why these things like NPV, like when we say an NPV is zero, it doesn't mean you don't go ahead with the project. You can go ahead with the project because your total objective is not money, it's other things. Like I've told you, it could be you don't want your child to depend on you at all. You want your child to depend on him or herself. So you go ahead with the project. So education is a project because you also, it's a project in the sense that you'll not educate a child forever. You'll say, okay, if my child finishes university, I'm happy with that because after university is a step towards being independent. So that is how we deal with NPV. So NPV is just one of the things which will determine whether you go ahead with the project or not go ahead with the project in monetary terms. If the NPV is greater than zero, go ahead with the project. Now, the next question is what I was expecting somebody to ask me. We can see these rates, 6%, and so on. Now, these rates, depending on what you choose, we shall get these different values for the NPV. So, and for 10%, I gave you this. 10% for all the project gives this. If you use 6%, it will give you different values. Now, I want you to try that. Try this project where you are discounting at 6%, and try these values when we are discounting at, say, when you discount at oops, what am I doing? When you are discounting at 15%, try it out just for the sake of argument. So why I'm saying try it out is, the question is, how do you determine this value? We chose 10%. Now the question somebody should have asked me is, why 10%? Why not 9? Why not 15? So to choose what to discount with, we go to okay, let's first of all, we go to what is called the internal rate of return. Now, before that, steps in calculating the NPV, you need to determine the initial investment. In other words, how much money are you putting in? You need to determine a time period to analyze, like in our case, we did 5 years. You need to estimate cash flows for each period. Each year, how much money am I getting? You need to determine the appropriate discount rate. Then you need to discount cash flows and you need to calculate the net value. Now we are here. How do you choose the discount rate? So, having seen that, we say that the net present value has the following disadvantages. One, it may not be comparable to other investments. You cannot use the NPV to compare with the other investments. It's giving you very little information. It's giving you it's giving you very little information. It's giving you some information, but it's not the whole information to make you go ahead with the project. So don't just use it like that. Then it may not be comparable to the cost of borrowing capital. So, and then also we have the problem of unequal cash flows. You don't know what the inflation is going to be. So the inflation this year is not the same inflation next year and the year after that. So this year you may say the inflation is at 5%, or rather 10% in the bank, or 9%. Now the inflation determines the rate at which the bank is going to give you money. So just like I said, early this year, late last year, early this year, banks were giving loans at 13%, 12.5, 13%. Come 2 weeks ago, we get notices that now banks will give you interest rates at 17%. Even if you borrowed at 13%, so if you borrow that, you know that I was going to finish this money in this period at 13%. But now they say, let's say you borrow money, you borrowed money in January at 13%. Now they are telling you our interest rate has gone. You know, at 13%, you know how much you'll pay back to the bank. At 13%, you know I borrowed 5 million shillings. At 13%, in 5 years' time, I'll pay 9 million shillings. But in between, the bank rate has shot up to 17%, meaning you are not going to pay the bank 9 million shillings. You are going to pay the bank 10.5 million shillings because the interest rate has shot up. And this is what we say, the problem of unequal cash flows. So when evaluating a proposal, it's possible to contend with unequal cash flows. In this scenario, the return on investment may fluctuate from 1 year to the next. So this type of ROI calculation is more complicated because it involves using the internal rate of return function in a spreadsheet or a calculator. So a solution to the limitations mentioned is to use the internal rate of return. Now, what is the internal rate of return? The internal rate of return is the discount rate when the NPV is 0. So in project 1, the internal rate of return is just over 10%. Now, why am I saying that? I'm saying that because of this. You can see in project 1, the net profit is 618. Now, what we want to do is to choose a discount factor that will make this 618. Now, if I choose a discount factor of 9, this is going to be a small, a big value. If I choose a discount factor of 11, this is going to be if I choose a discount factor of 9, this is going to be a small value. If I choose 11, this is going to be a big value. A negative one, okay, one is going to be a positive value and the other one is going to be a negative value. So I want a way of choosing this so that this is 0. Now, that is what I call the internal rate of return, and I'll tell you why we need the internal rate of return. So the internal rate of return is the discount rate when the NPV was zero. So in project one, the internal rate of return, you have to increase this. Now, it provides a profitability measure as a percentage return. Now, this is directly comparable to the interest rate. The internal rate of return is not used in isolation, it's used in conjunction with the net present value. Now, why are we saying it's directly comparable to the interest rate? Because the internal rate of return is a percentage. So you will use that percentage when you are borrowing money from the bank, when you want to borrow money from the bank, where it will guide you on, is this money that I'm borrowing worthwhile? Is this loan, I'm borrowing this loan to do this project. Now, is this project worthwhile? So we use the internal rate of return as a way of helping us to know whether to go, whether the loan we are taking is too expensive or whether the loan we are taking is beneficial to us. So the internal rate of return can be done using trial and error when done by hand. It can be done using a graphical method, or it can be done using a formula, or it can be done using spreadsheets. So at the internal rate of return, NPV is zero, or rather NPV is equal to zero, or the PV, the present value of future cash flows, minus the initial investment is going to be equals to zero. Now, this formula looks complicated, but it is not that complicated. Or you use this formula. The cash flow, where cash flow is the period of net cash inflow. CF2 is the, in other words, this indicates the year, this indicates the rate. So you will take the rate like 10% for year one. If your project is lasting up to 3 years, you will take 10% for year one. You will make this 10%, you'll make this 10%, you'll make this 10%. And I'm saying if that is for 3 years. Now, I've generalized by saying up to year N, where N can be anything. It can be 3, it can be 10 years. But what you will do is that you will check the initial investment, like let's take project one. Project one, where you are investing 100,000. So after you've taken that, so in other words, this doesn't really change. Then this also does not change. This, because you are doing it in year one, year two, year three, and so on. So the cash flow in year one, this one, year one, the cash flow is going to be 10,000. Then the rate is 10. So this is going to be 10,000, 1 plus 0.1 raised to the power of 1. Then plus this year 2. You will take 10,000, again 1.1 squared. Then you keep on going that year 3. Let's go up to year 3. Year 3 is still 10,000. Also year 4 is 20,000. Year 5 is 10,000. So you will keep doing that and subtracting the initial investment. I've said the initial investment is 100,000. So because this is, like I've said, it's trial and error when done by hand. So you will do this until a point where this sum for, like if it's for 5 years, minus 100,000, when it reaches 0, then you will know that that is the rate. So you'll keep changing this. So we started with 10, where we took the cash flow in year 1, 10, and that's why this remains. So, and as you can see, it's increasing with the number of years. So if it's 5, you'll do that and up to 5. Now, if you are getting a positive, then you'll change the rate. You'll change the rate maybe to 5 and so on. Now, you can see this is a very tedious process. And that's why we say it's done by trial and error. So that's one way of calculating the internal rate of return. So still on that, you can see that you'll have to be changing this and doing the calculations like that. For, like in our project, we are considering that for 5 years. So you use the end, it becomes fixed to 5. So you do that with different rates. So the guess and check method is calculation of IRR using the guess and the check method is select 2 discount rates for calculation of NPVs, calculate the NPVs of the investments using the 2 discount rates, calculate the IRR using step 1, and then calculate the IRR. Now, in this case, we take 10% and 12% as the guesses. Again, it's trial and error. Now, this is the discount as 10%. As you can see, I've picked these values from here. 10%, 0.9001, and so on. And 12%, 0.893, and so on. And I'm doing this up to 5 years. So like after 5 years, 10% is 0.621, 12% is negative 0.567. So you shall see that here. 0.567, 0.621. So we discount. This is the discount, the DCF, discounted cash flow for 10%. This is the discounted cash flow for 12%. Now, it's trial and error. You know, it's appearing simple to you because I've already done the calculation for you. But if you are doing it yourself, you will have to guess. Now, if you pick 10 and 9, you will find that both of them will be above the 0. They'll be positive. So you pick 1, which will give you a positive discounted cash flow, and another one which will give you a negative discounted cash flow, like this. So we draw a graph. When we discount at 10%, the discounted cash flow is going to be 620. You can see 620 is between 0 and 1,000. Then when you pick 12%, you can see it is negative 6,560. You can see this is 6,000, this is 7,000, this is 6,550. Now, where it crosses at this point, this is what we call the IRR, the internal rate of return. So from this graph, then it's going to be between 10 and 10.5. So it's going to be there. So what is telling you, or what is this IRR telling me? Okay, no, let me use the formula first. Now, the other one is to use the formula. And you see, for IRR, there's a degree of guessing. So if you use the formula is R1 plus NPV1, R2 minus R1, NPV1 minus NPV2, where R1 is the lower rate, like in our case it's 10%, R2 is the higher rate, 12%, so here we shall have 10% minus 12%. The net present one is the NPV for the lower rate, this 620. The NPV2 is the NPV for the higher rate, this. So that is the formula. So this is the table, this is our formula. So you can see, to get the IRR, we shall say R1, in other words, it's this formula. So R1 NPV1 times R2 minus R1 NPV1 minus NPV2. So we shall take R1, the initial rate, the lower rate, plus NPV1 620, this one, times NPV2 12% minus NPV1 10% divided by 6, NPV2 minus NPV1, 620 minus 6560. So we do this. Now when we calculate, we get 10.17. Now you can see here you are getting an exact figure. Here 10.17. Here you can see that if you had calibrated the graph properly, you would probably, oh, this is where it crosses the zero. So I was looking at this. This is where it crosses the zero. So you can see it's going to be, by calculation, we have got it as 10.17%. By calculation, by graphical methods, we can see it's here. Now, if this graph is calibrated properly, then you can know the exact figure. So here is 10.5. Here is 10. It must be 10, somewhere between 10.0 and 10.5, somewhere here. So you look for the graph, you look for this figure. Now you can see these two figures are comparable. So that is the IRR. Now it is the IRR because of two reasons. Now one of the reasons I asked you is I was using 10% to calculate my NPV. Then I mentioned or asked, why 10%? Why not 11? Why not 15? Why not 6? So you don't just pick that value for the sake of picking it. You want to pick a realistic figure. Okay. I think he's admitted. Or was he raising a question? Were you raising a question, or you wanted to be admitted? I'm not too sure. Okay. So there are two reasons why you need to do that calculation. One of the reasons is, how do you determine this value? So we use the IRR to determine this value. Then number two, a lot of times when you want to start a project, you borrow money from somewhere. Now let's assume you are borrowing money from a bank. Then you need to know, do I borrow, is it worthwhile me borrowing the money to go ahead with this project? So the IRR is going to give you a guideline, because we know that if the value is low, as you can see, 10 is smaller than 12%. Now, if you discount at 12%, you'll not get any profit. If you discount at 10%, you'll get a profit of 620. Here, your project after 5 years, you'll have lost if you take money into consideration. So what the IRR does, it guides you. I've known that my IRR is 10.17. Therefore, what I will do is I will go to the bank and ask them, okay, I want to have 5 million. So I want to borrow 5 million. What is your interest rate? It tells me 17%. But I've done forecasting and I've seen my IRR is 10.17 and you're telling me 17%. If I take that loan and go ahead with this project, I will lose money. So I don't go ahead with the project. So, like I've said, there are two reasons. One, it will guide you on which rate to use to discount. Then number two, if you are going to borrow money, you will tell the bank, ask the bank the rate, and if it tells you a rate that is bigger than your IRR, then you know that you are going to, you will not get any monetary value with your project. But like I've told you, monetary value is not the only thing. There are other things, and I gave you the example of your dad educating you. So if your dad is educating you with money only in his mind, he will not educate you. But if he's educating you with money and other things in mind, then he'll educate you. But these days, most parents, you educate your child so that they are independent. You don't educate thinking that they'll help you in old age. So those are the considerations you need to make. So what is the interpretation of the IRR? The decision rule for IRR is that an investment should only be selected where the cost of capital is lower than the IRR. What I was telling you. This project, so you can see, as the interest rate increases, you start going into negatives. So select if your source of funding, you look at your source of funding vis-a-vis your IRR. If it's less than IRR, go ahead with the project. So the decision rule above will lead to the same conclusion as the NPV analysis, where only one investment is being considered. So if you use the IRR and the NPV for only one project, then it will give you a guidance. But in cases of many projects, it may not give you a good answer. So NPV and IRR are not the complete answer. So, and I've already mentioned that. Funding, future earning prediction, organization context must all be taken into consideration. So yes, it's a good guideline financially, but you need to think about other things. Ethical things, for example, environmental issues, and so on. So I want you to do this as an exercise. That's another exercise. Now, IRR can be calculated using Excel. So what I want you to go to these websites and follow them. I don't, when anything to do with software, I've realized over time, when you do it yourself, you learn better than me going through the class and trying going through the steps. When you go through these steps, you learn in a better way. And I realized this a long time ago when I was still a student. Uh, when I was doing my masters, I went to a university abroad. Lecturers never demonstrated the things on board. They just gave you a handout. When it came to practical, they give you a handout and they tell you, go and do it. In fact, if you ask them a question, the answers they would give, they would not be very cooperative. So that's how they did. So finally, what we have said is this. I've looked at the 4 options, and those 4 things in combination give you, make you have a realistic choice. So we have net profit, we have return on investment, we have annualized return on investment, and then we have the discounted cash flow. Now, in all this, you'll find that project 4 is winning, because project 4 has a high discounted cash flow. Project 4 has the highest annualized return on investment. Project 4 has the highest return on investment. Project 4 is only beaten by Project 3 when it comes to the payback period. So Project 4 wins. Any questions? Any questions? Okay, now. So why were we doing all these things? We're doing all those things because we want to see whether to go ahead with the project or not. So we'll consider the other things. Now, financially, we've said this is the option we are going to do.
Excuse me, sir.
Yes.
I had a question. I had an issue with the microphone. So for a project, say a software project,
Mhm.
and we discussed, we said there are issues like visibility and complexity.
Yes.
How would you be able to properly estimate cash flows for a project? And this is an example that I had. Take for example the footballing sector in our country.
Mhm.
They do not have what most Western or even just countries abroad have, like they're able to perform analytics in real time, streaming analytics. How would you be able to estimate cash flows for a project like that locally? Um, and let's say you're working with the government and you're not sure how, if you're going to get the money on time, given things like corruption. If you're now thinking of strategic issues, how will you be able to estimate cash flow properly? That's why I'm struggling.
Okay. And this is why I told you software projects are very difficult projects to handle. And there's I don't know, I think it's in this class, I talked about it, that a long time ago, there used to be a course called software metrics, where actually software metrics is what factors do you consider uh, when you are estimating the cost of software. Now, in the 90s, especially early 90s, that course was very popular. Okay, different institutions used to call it different names, but in my institution, they used to call it software metrics. Now, that course was quite abstract, and I think, yeah, it's in this class I mentioned, where I said even the time we were taught the course, what the lecturer came, he didn't give a lecture the way I'm giving. He just came and asked, how can you measure the cost of software? And the different people came with different answers. Some people said you count the lines of code. Some people said you look at the logic. Some people said you look at the software, at the user interface. So with that question, what he ended up saying, he said, you see, all of you have different answers how to measure software. First of all, okay, the course was called software quality, because once you define quality, then you can put a monetary value to it. Yeah. So first of all, we have those what we are calling software quality metrics, then which are figures. Then you put a value to it, and so on. And then based on that, you come with an estimated cost. So just like I'm telling you, he told us, okay, go in groups of 2, talk about that particular metrics that you've chosen, then come and present. When all the groups had presented, he said that is the end of the course. Write a paper based on those. Then he said it's the end of the course. Then we were a bit puzzled, because how does a course end like that? Then he said it's because software is as diverse as the number of people who are doing it, who are going to use that software. So I cannot give you an answer. He said, wherever you are, I mean, you estimate the cost based on your experience. So I see where you are headed, where your problem is. And what I'm telling you, I cannot give you an answer, because software is as diverse as the number of people. And the metrics keep varying. The software for a child is not going to be the software for an adult, and so on. So that cost keeps changing from person to person. So the best way of trying to estimate it is, first of all, to start by looking at the requirements, then the functionality, and so on. But it's difficult. And like you said, for you to estimate that cost, you need to have prior information. And again, like you rightfully said, in advanced countries, you can gather that statistics. You can use that statistics to estimate something about the software. But if you don't have that data, you cannot do it. And that is one of the main reasons why software projects fail. And that's why you remember at the beginning, I talked about introducing project management. Then there was a subsection in that introduction where I said, now let us look at software. So I don't know whether I'm giving you an answer, but what I'm telling you is that it's very difficult. And these are some of the things you are going to encounter. So you may be lucky when you become an entrepreneur, you may be lucky that you'll be making money, but sometimes you lose money. And for software, projects succeed with experience. Software projects depend on what is called heuristics, or rules of the thumb, things that you learn as you go along, not things that you are going to learn in class. I think that is all how I can explain to you. I don't know whether I'm answering you or I'm answering the wrong question.
Yeah, it makes sense, since you said it's difficult, and I think you said we can refer to the requirements.
Sorry?
Yeah, I've captured the difficult part, and that requirements are probably what you can focus on.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks.
All right. So finally, We have done all these things. Why have we done all these things? And remember, up to now, the project has not started. Now, we are doing all these things because you will end up with what is called a project charter. Now, what is a project charter? A project charter is a legal document that is signed between you and the major stakeholders, or between you and the project owner. So when the project charter is signed off, one has approval to proceed to detailed planning, followed by carrying out the project. So organizational process assets, you need to ask, do we have a standard format for project charters? Is there a standard process for developing and getting approval for a project charter? What can the project management office do for you? What does the project management office require of you? Are there applicable lessons learned available from other projects? If you are inexperienced, is there a mentor available? So before you write the project charter, you need to answer these questions. Now, like I've said, you only go to writing the project charter once you have done that evaluation of the project. So at the end of this phase, you'll end up with a document. Now, when the document has been signed, then the project is starting. So I think because of time, I'll end up there, and we'll talk about the project charter in the next class. And it's when, after this, we shall look at our first assignment, but I'll talk about that on Thursday. So any questions? Yes, Doc.
Yeah, sir, I still haven't gotten an invite to the classroom.
Okay, I don't know why. Okay, let me try and do it right away.
Okay.
Yeah. The notes, I'm going to post them. And make sure you sign the register. So let's meet on Thursday.